All right, back on the Young Turks. Now we're going to talk to author Gretchen Peters. She's the author of the book Seeds of Terror, How Heroin is Bankrolling the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Gretchen, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. So let me get right to it. How much of the money that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda have in Afghanistan is coming from the heroin business?
Well, I think it's very difficult to estimate the percentages. Back in the first edition of my book in 2009, I quoted a DEA report that suggested it was somewhere in the range of 70% of the Taliban's funding came from drugs. But since that time, there has been a tremendous expansion into other forms of criminal activities, including extortion, kidnapping, gun running, people trafficking. As well, there's not just one Taliban. There are 3 separately commanded factions in Afghanistan. There are 5 separately commanded factions in Pakistan. And they really interact the way a sort of broad network of criminal gangs would interact. I tell people, if you want to understand the Taliban, you ought to start watching The Sopranos, because it's very similar to the way the New York mob fights the New Jersey mob. When you start looking at the way these two groups, or these various factions interact. Sometimes they fight, sometimes they collaborate, but it's often about money.
Gretchen, I'm not the least bit surprised by that. You know, they say that they're sexually pure and then they sleep with underage boys. They say the Taliban does in Afghanistan. We did a story on that just 2 weeks ago, and before that as well. They say that they're against any kind of alcohol or drugs, and then they make most of their money selling the drugs. I think the real question is, what are you going to do about it? So what's your proposal?
Well, a number of things. First of all, I think that there is, I think the United States government and the NATO alliance that is commanding the coalition in Afghanistan could be using this as a public relations message. I think it's a very powerful message to report back to the Afghan and Pakistani people that the Taliban are so deeply involved in criminal activities. They're not just breaking international law, they're not just breaking U.S. law when they engage in drug trafficking. I think more importantly, they're breaking Quranic law, Islamic jurisprudence, and Islam reviles the thief. I think that this isn't, recasting them as narco traffickers, as a mafia organization, could be a very powerful public relations message. Also, I think it's important to note that the U.S. government has failed spectacularly pretty much wherever it's gone in trying to stop the drug trade. They've never been able to stop the flow of drugs coming to the United States. And in this case, the drugs, the opium and hashish produced in Afghanistan generally don't end up sold in the United States. They're a very, very small percentage of the drugs sold here come from Afghanistan. However, the U.S. government has become quite good at shutting down organizations that are involved in drug trafficking by following the money and shutting down the bank accounts and the front companies that these organizations use. The Treasury Department has done this to the Cali cartel, to John Gotti, to other organizations in the United States and around the world. And if you think back to the days of Al Capone, it was Elliot Ness, a U.S. Treasury Department official, that brought down Al Capone, not the FBI, not the military. And I think this would be a much more effective policy or strategy to pursue than firing predator strikes at compounds in the mountains of Pakistan. You shut down a network this way instead of trying to pick off one terrorist at a time.
Right. At the same time, no matter what we do, the drugs keep on flowing and they keep getting the money, and violence, whether it's in Mexico or in Afghanistan, continues to rise, and they're selling it right from underneath our nose when we're occupying the country. So that leads me to a different solution. Just legalize it, okay? Let the government sell it, and so we drive all these gangs and terrorists, in the case of Afghanistan, out of business, because it's hopeless. We're never, ever going to win that war, because there's still demand no matter what we do.
Well, I think the legalization argument is a very interesting one, and I now live in Denver, where I'm a PhD student at the Corbell School of International Studies, studying international crime and the drug trade. And it's interesting for me being in Denver right now, because we now have legalized medical marijuana, and the city and state are sort of struggling to control the growth of this industry. I don't think anybody's trying to shut it down, but here in Colorado, where we have a very effective local, state, and federal government, local, state, and federal police, they're really struggling to regulate this industry. And I think in Afghanistan, I think medical marijuana should be legalized both here and nationwide. I think it's a good thing for the United States to step in this direction. It will provide extraordinary savings for people who have cancer and other wasting diseases, who are now using more addictive pain medication, and most of them opiates, ironically. So I think I support that. But in Afghanistan, where there isn't a functioning government, I'm not really sure who's going to regulate a legalized opium trade at this point. And I think at this point, it probably isn't a good idea. Down the line, I can see that taking place. But right now, at this point in Afghan history, I think we need to focus on helping the Afghans improve the level of governance, particularly in the rural areas. And that's a much tougher project. Once that happens, there can be legalized hashish and opium that is used in medicines or for whatever people want. I'm not trying to, in other words, I'm not coming at this from a moral perspective, an anti-drug perspective. I come at this from a national security perspective. I think it's extremely worrisome that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and other organizations linked to Al-Qaeda are making so much money on drugs and other crime. And we need to do whatever we can to cut off those flows of money.
Yeah, no, we're never going to cut it off. Never, ever, ever. As long as it's illegal, they're going to continue to make it. You know what happened once we legalized alcohol? What happened to all the gangs, the Al Capone and all those guys? You know who ran them out of business? Not the United States government. We don't have to worry about regulating or whether it's Afghan government or the U.S. government. Budweiser ran them out of business, okay? So if you legalize this stuff, multinational corporations come in, they'll crush the farmers of Afghanistan. Don't you worry about a thing. There won't be any more opium trade from there. We'll grow it in Kansas. We'll make a ton of money off of it, and they'll be done. And problem solved. Okay, but I got to leave it right there. But your book is definitely an interesting one for the food for thought. It's called Seeds of Terror, How Heroin is Bankrolling the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Gretchen, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Young Turks, we'll be back.